The United States just made 3 decisions that will cost Ukrainian lives today. And for those of you who don't care about that at all, you should also know those same decisions are going to be detrimental to U.S. national security over the long term, something we're going to talk about in today's video. So just in the last couple days, the United States has said that we are no longer sharing intelligence with Ukraine, that we have stopped all military aid shipments to Ukraine, and last, maybe worst of all, we told Russia exactly how long this pause would be. Now, personally, I disagree with a lot of the policy direction we've taken related to Ukraine in recent weeks, but we're not even going to get into that today. Instead, we're going to focus on the botched execution, the unforced errors here that are bad, again, not just for Ukraine, but also the United States. I mean, when you look at the variety of options we had at our disposal, it seems like the United States chose the most cruel, the one that will unnecessarily put Ukrainian lives at risk. But let's get into it. So the first one here, news that just came out earlier today, is that the United States is pausing intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And this has come out from a couple different sources, the CIA, as well as Mike Waltz here, the National Security Advisor, and more on his statements here in a moment. But the intelligence sharing has a couple different aspects. There's the offensive and the defensive side of this. On the offensive side, and we'll turn to Russian Telegram channel Military Informant, kind of talking about how Ukraine has leveraged U.S. intelligence. On the offensive side, they've used that to target Russian positions, not just Russian troop buildups, maybe inside of Ukraine or even inside of Russia, but long range or targets deep inside of Russian territory even. So headquarters, warehouses, air defense positions, things like that. Think about this as satellite imagery, real-time satellite imagery pushed down to Ukraine so they can identify targets that maybe aren't showing up on Google Earth. Right? That's not a capability unique to the United States, but it's what the United States was providing to Ukraine. And something worth keeping in mind here is, from everything I can tell, we are still gathering that intelligence. The decision we made was that we are just not going to tell Ukraine about it. Now, I get the offensive side here. Say, fine, we're going to back out. We're not going to assist them with their offensive strikes. The second piece here, to me, is even bigger and more telling. Ukraine also uses U.S.-based intelligence, according to Milinfo Live here, to counter large-scale Russian missile strikes. American satellites monitor the preparation of long-range aviation for flights and transmitted information to Ukraine almost every minute. What they're getting at is from some of these Shahed or Garan-style drone launch sites. We know where those are throughout Russia. We have real-time monitoring of those, and when those begin to be launched, we let Ukraine know and say, hey, in a little while here, you're going to start having a lot of drones overhead striking your cities so they can start to prepare. Same with long-range missiles. In most cases, it would be aircraft being loaded up with cruise missiles. A while ago, it could have been ships out in the Black Sea. That's not really happening anymore. But either way, we have been giving Ukraine a notice. Hey, missile strike inbound. Get ready. That allows civilians to move into bunkers and protected areas. It can activate Ukrainian air defense. And again, a lot of these strikes, we're talking about 3,000 drone strikes last month alone, long-range drone strikes. The majority of those are against civilian infrastructure in major cities across Ukraine. So again, the United States will still have that information, but we made the decision today that once we look at that and see Russia lining up strikes against Kyiv, we're going to sit on it and not pass it to our friends in Ukraine. This is partially why I'm saying these are just cruel choices, unnecessarily cruel choices. Maybe Europe will be able to step in here and backfill this at some point. I'd be surprised if there's a direct overlap in capabilities and assets looking at this stuff with our European allies, but they do have a degree of these capabilities and likely will backfill in the near term. But when looking at this, and I want you to keep this in mind when moving forward to the next couple here, why not give Ukraine 30 days? Why did this have to be overnight is a big question I have. And it comes back to that cruelty aspect. And it's going to unnecessarily cost lives. Imagine right here if we had said to Ukraine, maybe behind the scenes, hey, you need to get to the negotiating table with Russia. If you don't have a meeting set by April 1st, April 2nd, whatever date we choose, we're going to stop sharing real-time intelligence. 30 days to get to the negotiating table. Round 1 of the negotiations. That seems reasonable, right? And if that isn't met, then maybe you come out and you say something like this publicly. From everything I can tell, this was the first mention of this, was out. No more intel. That is going to affect Ukraine today. And we're still seeing real-time regular strikes carried out by Ukraine. Just last night in the Odessa region, Russia launched drones that killed a 77-year-old civilian and damaged at least 20 buildings. If you're Russia, and you're looking at this, this means for the very first time since this war began, certainly, and honestly, before that even, the first time that the United States is not monitoring and sharing Russian launch locations or Russian launch information. If I'm Russia right now, I'm probably going to put together some sort of decent-sized missile strike or drone attack in the next couple of days to find out what are those gaps in the Ukrainian capabilities. Without the United States backing them up, let's see exactly what we can get through. Again, kind of a problem when we also just told Russia that it's essentially up to them when we turn this intel sharing back on, which is absolutely wild to me. Now, I should mention, we talked about in yesterday's video, Zelensky did come back to President Trump just yesterday and said, hey, I'm ready to talk. We want peace more than anybody. I'm ready to sign this mineral agreement. You tell me when and where. Let's get it done. We're on board. Let's keep these talks happening. Didn't hear any response from the United States on this one. In fact, the only official response from the United States after this letter from Zelensky was President Trump mentioned it last night at his congressional address. I guess not technically a State of the Union, but he mentioned this. And then the next news out was no more intel. So it doesn't seem like anything good happened for Ukraine from this. Instead, it was quite the opposite. Now, this comes just a couple days after the U.S. announced that we're shutting off all military aid to Ukraine. And this is the second of 3 decisions that will cost Ukrainian lives in the short term. So this aid here again, think of the 30-day aspect here. This is what we did with the tariffs with Canada and Mexico, right? Where we said, hey, get your act together, solve these issues, whatever it might be, inside of 30 days, or there's going to be tariffs. It's not life or death situation. There are soldiers on the front right now relying on this equipment. There are civilians in Ukraine relying on those air raid alerts to get to bunkers to save the lives of themselves and their children. Those very much are life or death. So why not give a 30-day notice? Again, make up the day, whatever it's going to be, and say, we have to get to the negotiating table by this time, or else we're going to X. Now, there were a bunch of different options here at the Trump administration's disposal. First was to just say, we're not going to provide any additional arms packages. Remember, this one, they're still kind of going off of some of the packages put together under the Biden administration. They haven't all been fulfilled. But even Speaker Johnson recently said there's no appetite for a future Ukraine aid package. That could be, target one in terms of we have to reach a deal between Russia and Ukraine by then. But you can back it up all the way apparently to right now, because this aid was stuff that was allocated by a bipartisan Congress, Republicans and Democrats, signed off by President Biden. Some of this aid was already in Poland, getting ready to cross the border. And at that point, we said, stop it all. Nothing else is moving in. Everything, right? So this is replacement parts, anything that might have broken on the equipment they already have, let alone the ammunition and interceptors and new vehicles, anything like that, the medical supplies, all of that is fully stopped. Again, think of the leverage that could have been done here to say 30 days. Now, Europe is not going to be able to backfill that in 30 days, so it doesn't really change the dynamic. It adds the leverage, and it gives Ukraine the opportunity to meet these demands of the United States. Also, similar to the Intel one, I think it's worth mentioning this could have been done behind the scenes. And if it isn't agreed upon behind the scenes or Ukraine blows past the deadline, then you make it public. Given how many negative remarks we've seen from both sides at this point. If this had been a deal behind the scenes that had not been met, I'm certain at this point we would have heard about it. So instead, it seems like both the turning off of intelligence and the turning off of all military aid was a relatively rapid decision, effective time now. The last piece here, the third piece here, before diving into how this impacts U.S. national security, is the report coming out from Barack Ravid here about Mike Waltz, the U.S. National Security Advisor, is saying the U.S. will continue to suspend weapons and weapon supplies and intelligence until a date for peace talks with Russia is set. Here's the thing. Ukraine doesn't actually dictate that. Russia, just within the last couple days, has said there's nothing set at this point. They've specifically said that they are continuing their goals of the special military operation. They haven't slowed down their attacks. They're continuing drone and missile strikes. They're still advancing in certain areas of the front. So what we are signaling to Russia right here is Ukraine will get no more weapons and no more intelligence until Russia decides that they are ready to come to the table. Ukraine can't force Russia to sit down. And everything we've seen recently is they're not ready to bring about an end to the war. There's still a lot of terms that we have thrown out there, the United States, that Russia's pushed back on and said, nope, not good enough. So we are essentially cutting off an ally of ours, Ukraine, and forcing them to get their adversary, Russia, to the negotiating table, you kind of have to wonder, what can Ukraine do now to get those weapons turned back on? Maybe nothing, right? They're going to have to cede a lot to get Russia to the table at all. And then, there's probably not going to be a scenario following those negotiations where Ukraine will be able to continue to fight. So this one, to me, is hard to get my head around. The idea that we're just blatantly telling Russia all of this stuff is off until you guys are ready to sit down. If it feels backwards, I think it largely is. Now, in terms of the impact here to U.S. national security, there's a couple different ways to look at this. First off, I do want to pull up the UN vote from a couple days ago, the third anniversary of the war in Ukraine, where we saw the United States vote alongside Russia. And one part of this is we see most of our allies, other than, we've got countries like North Korea, Hungary, Belarus, and of course Russia voting with us. Most of our allies are on the other side here, right? Just about the entirety of the European Union. All of those countries are looking at what we just did. All of those countries in green here support Ukraine and want Ukraine to at least survive in their war with Russia. They're all watching what we just, and I'm going to say it again, took the cruel option that is going to cost Ukrainian lives. How many of our allies right now are looking at that and trust us for anything going forward? I mean, we are applying leverage on an ally to get an adversary to act. Imagine some of the smaller countries in here seeing that. Think of the Pacific, right? Whether it's Taiwan or South Korea or Japan, Australia, or any of our European allies. Thinking the United States is taking the exact opposite approach of what I would want if that person was in my corner. The second big piece here has to do with the actual weapons. The United States has sold so many weapons to our allies all around the world. We've got a massive military-industrial complex, don't we? And we've got right now countries around the world, allies of ours, saying, I don't know if the U.S. is actually a reliable ally. In order to get something they wanted, they just shut off military aid to Ukraine. They're turning off intel sharing for any number of allies. That would, at the very least, be a significant hiccup. Now, in the case of Ukraine, there probably will be somebody to fill in that gap. And in the case of a lot of our European allies, if we all of a sudden said we're not going to share intel, there is a way for them to get around that and to find ways to continue forward with their mission. But the idea that that's on the table at all is having an impact around the world. I mean, what's written here in Defense News is that European defense stocks are soaring because the talk right now from major countries, the UK, France, Germany, and others, is everything has to be domestic. We can't rely on the United States anymore. They're talking about some of their major defense companies here. Leonardo up 16%, BAE 14%, Rheinmetall, which I feel like I'm always saying incorrectly, up 13%. Again, it would be silly watching all of this play out where we're shutting off our allies for other allies around the world to not look to themselves. We're going to lose defense contracts over this. Those are American companies employing American civilians. Their stock is owned by pension funds around the world. Like, that is a net negative for the United States economy. It's a net negative for the U.S. national defense in the sense that a lot of our allies are not liking how we're treating a friend right now in their time of need. They are not seeing us take a neutral stance with Ukraine. And that was part of the argument here with this vote, was we're trying to get back to this neutral position so we can effectively negotiate a good deal between Ukraine and Russia. That's not what they're seeing right now. And I'm not seeing it either, to be blunt. What I'm seeing instead is leverage being applied on Ukraine, on our ally, to try to get our adversary to come to the table. And again, for any country around the world seeing that right now, you have to imagine that they are kind of recalibrating their relationship with the United States going forward. So again, in just the last couple of days, intel sharing off, weapon supply off, and telling Russia exactly how long this will last, my prediction is you're probably going to see an increase in Russian strikes here in the next 24 to 72 hours, because why not? And for Ukraine, I don't know what they can do right now. It seems like this is taken a little bit out of their hands. They're going to have to continue to fight with what they have and probably rely even more heavily on Europe. But again, personal assessment, it feels like the United States in this specific case, we took the most cruel path forward, a path that will cost the lives of Ukrainian citizens and damage U.S. national security over the long term. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.